morning, my beautiful babes and babettes. I am your resident active advocate, and today we get to talk about The Incredibles! Yes! Ugh, I never look back, darling. It distracts from the now. Is the best line in the movie. Edna is the best character in the movie. She's me in cartoon form. We're both very, very short. We're both very, very full of ourselves. And we both never look back. That's a lie. But anyway, moving on. The disability narrative in this movie is both quite apparent and quite odd. So, here's what we have. We have a bunch of what you would call neuroatypical and physically atypical people running around who have superpowers. And The Incredibles focuses on an entire family of superheroes. Mr. and Mrs. Incredible, and their 3 beautiful children. What happens earlier on in the movie is that Bob, the main character, he saves a guy who is about to die by suicide, and Bob gets himself sued because the guy says, "You didn't save my life, you ruined my death." The whole idea was that he wanted to die and didn't want to be saved. So there's a lawsuit against Bob, which actually results not only in Bob being banned from using his powers, which are super strength. I think it's just super strength that Bob has. So he has super strength, but every other hero, and it's not just this family, is also banned from using their powers because of the backlash against all of the supers who have interfered with the law, with things going wrong in and around the city, in and around the country. And this ban is permanently in place, at least until this movie. So, to me, what powers represent is a form of both mental and physical atypicality, depending on what your power is. For example, the daughter, Violet, she is able to produce force fields, and she is also able to turn invisible. So the force fields thing could be neuroatypicality, and then the invisibility thing would be physical atypicality, all right? But the whole idea with her is protection because of the family members. She is the most introverted, the most closed off. And oftentimes a hero's power will be a sort of manifestation of their personality. So Bob, for example, has a very strong personality. He knows what he wants. He knows how to get it. So he has super strength. Helen, his wife, also known as Elastigirl, she's very, in the figurative sense and in the literal sense, flexible. She's able to look after her family after, the shit hits the fan and the lawsuit comes out against Bob, and because of the public backlash, all the people are banned from using their powers. So until that point, the very interesting part of this narrative is that the supers were not only accepted, but looked up to. They were heroes, superheroes. And that is not despite, but because of their atypicality. So what I see here is a very interesting reversal of the disability narrative, the one that you most commonly see, the one where people who are different are ostracized, are othered, until the lawsuits come out because people start looking upon them as you would more commonly expect from disability narratives up to this point in history, that we're all a bunch of freaks, right? That we're not normal, we're not meant to fit in, la-di-frickin-da. You've seen this a million times. Another interesting aspect of this, however, is that at the beginning of the movie, there is a fanboy named Jimmy who follows Mr. Incredible around, and Jimmy is a child prodigy. He is a genius. He's able to create machines that ostensibly give him superpowers. He's got like hoverboards and things like that, so he's able to fly and to move at, great rates of speed and things like that. But Mr. Incredible tells him, "Go home, Jimmy, I work alone." The implication here is that You can only be a legitimate superhero, you can only be accepted as such if your powers are inborn. If you are born with your powers as opposed to acquiring them. Sound familiar? Inborn disability versus acquired disability. If we were to reverse the narrative and say that supers are people or representative of people with disabilities, or as I've been saying up to this point, atypicality, right? So even in the real world nowadays, people with inborn disabilities are still seen as inferior, actually, to those who acquire them later in life through accident, through illness, through injury, through old age, right? So again, we have a reversal. You are better, not worse, if you were born with your atypicality. You are worse, not better, if it was acquired. If somehow you managed to build it because you're a genius, Jimmy. Later on in the movie, therefore, spoilers, Jimmy becomes known as Syndrome, who is, in common opinion, one of the greatest supervillains to ever see the light of Disney. And because he has been able to build so many different tools and machines, the government has latched onto what he's capable of doing and pays him exorbitant amounts of money to make machines and armaments for the US military, which is the biggest military in the world, even in the real world. Like, far larger military spending in the US as opposed to every country that follows it. Like, the next 10 countries combined do not have a military budget that adds up to that of the US. I've seen many arguments for the military budget in the US even being cut in half. They would still be fine, but I digress. So Jimmy has been hired on by the US government to create armaments for them. But he also still holds the grudge against Mr. Incredible for rejecting him when he was a child. Go home, Jimmy. I work alone. You are not fit even to stand in my shadow, even to be my sidekick, because you were not born with your difference. So that's what pushes Jimmy to become a villain. You know, he's used to being rejected by this point because it's at least implied that the rest of his life is not very happy either. So you get the case of Jimmy trying to kill Mr. Incredible on multiple occasions and failing every single time because Mr. Incredible was born with his powers. Okay, like I say, this is a reversal of the common disability narrative. At the end of the movie, the youngest of the children, Jack, he's a baby, okay? He can't even speak yet. So he's probably not exactly a newborn, but a few months old, right? And you see that he has multiple powers. It's been speculated online that it's because he hasn't yet molded into a proper super. He doesn't know, or like his power is not yet solidified. His actual, like, this is your power, is not yet solidified. So he is able to demonstrate a whole bunch of different powers at the same time. Lights himself on fire at one point, turns himself into a monster, turns himself into stone and makes himself very heavy. And this is too much for Jimmy. This is too much for Syndrome, who is not able to hold on to the child and is subsequently sucked into the motor and turbine of his own jet because he wears a cape. Towards the beginning of the movie, again, this is why I like Edna. She's very forceful. No capes! No capes! She says to Mr. Incredible, who just wants a patch job on his old suit, but Edna, being the queen she is, insists on making him a new one. But superhero work is illegal, he says to her. Yes, darling, but here we are, she says to him. I love Edna. So, the disability narrative in this movie is very progressive, especially by Disney standards, but also very strange. And the thing I definitely don't like about this narrative is that it frowns upon acquired disability, or what could be the stand-in for acquired disability or acquired atypicality, which is making your own, You know, there's no hierarchy necessarily between that which you're born with and that which you acquire if they result in the same disability. For example, if you are born blind, there's no difference between that versus whether you injure your eyes somehow or get a disease. Think Helen Keller, you know, and she went deafblind because of, I believe it was scarlet fever. Functionally, there is no difference in terms of attitude towards it. There is rather a difference, and that comes forward from ancient times even down to modern times. Functionally, though, nowadays in modern times, the only advantage to being born with a disability is that you live with it longer. You may know better strategies for how to contend with it in a world that is constantly developing around you. But where the attitude still hasn't seen the best shift it possibly could, things are getting better, and even the disability narrative here in Disney is getting better. So I really do want to point out the fact that this is progressive, but as with the world itself currently, good, but not great. It could do better. And yeah, that is The Incredibles. I didn't even talk about Dash. Dash is implied to have attention deficit, even attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So his superpower is super speed, as both his name and his demeanor implies. But with Syndrome, the interesting part about this is that, yes, he is a super genius, but because there's no correlation between his intelligence and an inborn difference, he is seen as inferior, even though he can make his own difference and make himself, you know, just as powerful as any natural born super. It doesn't matter because personality wise, there's no correlation between who he is versus what he can do. You know, theoretically, if he were born with some kind of superpower, it would probably be mind reading or telekinesis or any, quote, psychic power that a person could have. You know, you see superheroes throughout, like, the comic book industry, who can do strange things with their minds. Like I say, reading minds, telepathy, moving objects with their minds, that sort of thing, walking through walls, all the sorts of things that are associated with intellectual power rather than physical power. So he's juxtaposed to Mr. Incredible, who tends to do things through brawn because he's so huge. You know, he's physically capable of doing these things. But Syndrome does things through his intelligence rather than through his muscle. And that, because he's not born with it, is what makes him a supervillain rather than a superhero. But if he had been accepted by Mr. Incredible, there could have been a very different narrative there. And, you know, in terms of the societal ethos in this movie, there could have been a very different narrative there too. If people who were capable of building these machines, or to whom Syndrome had given these machines, if they were accepted by the wider hero community, it could have been very different. Okay, so that is The Incredibles. And I think I will tackle The Incredibles 2 when I come around to it in the schedule. And I do have a schedule, and I do have a list, and it's the actual master list. But that's going to be quite a while from now. I also have not seen that movie, so I'm going to have to do that first. Yeah, it was kind of like with Brother Bear. I hadn't seen Brother Bear, right? So I had to watch it and then research the heck out of it because there was a lot to unpack. With this one, there was also a lot to unpack, but I had seen it before, so it worked. All right, so have a lovely, wonderful day. The sun is shining, the grass is greening, woohoo! It's all good. And I will see y'all tomorrow. Mwah!